Good morning, everyone. I think we are ready to start our session. Just double checking with my colleagues that everything is set up. And well, I'm glad to welcome you to this roundtable on gender justice and biodiversity. Today, we will delve into implementing the CBD Gender Plan of Action on the ground. I am Amelia Reguin, coordinator of the UNCBD Women's Caucus, and I will be moderating today's session. But before starting, I would like to share just quick details that we have interpretation services are available for this webinar. We have interpreters providing simultaneous interpretation in both Spanish and French. If you prefer to listen to the sessions in either of these languages, please follow these instructions. Locate the interpretation button at the bottom toolbar of your Zoom window. Click on the interpretation button represented by a globe icon and select the language that you would prefer, Spanish or French, and the interpretation audio will be available. Please note that it's vital to mute the original audio channel when listening to the interpreters, so we avoid overlapping sounds. We hope that this feature enhances your experience and allows you to engage with the content fully. Thank you for your attention, and we hope you find the interpretation services beneficial for your participation in this webinar. And well, coming back to the reason why we are here, as we are all aware, biodiversity conservation is of utmost importance for the health of our planet and our well-being. Unfortunately, women and girls' contributions and roles in biodiversity conservation have often been overlooked. However, the recently adopted Gender Plan of Action at COP15 aims to address this gap by promoting gender-responsive approaches in conservation efforts. In this context, the UNCBD Women's Caucus, in collaboration with the Secretariat of the CBD, offers this space where good practices, lessons learned, and concrete ways forward will be shared for all actors interested in implementing immediately and effectively the GPA on the ground in collaboration with women's organizations and leaders. The purpose of this session then are first to raise awareness about the importance of the Gender Plan of Action and its content, to disseminate best practices and opportunities for governments, local authorities, and diverse organizations to lead its effective implementation, and also to showcase how partnerships with women's organizations on the territories to implement the GPA could increase better outcomes for people and biodiversity. Now that we have clarity on why we are gathered here, let me introduce our esteemed panel of experts who will provide valuable insights and engage in a meaningful discussion on implementing the Gender Plan of Action. So if my dear panel, could you open your cameras so people, our audience can see your faces while I'm introducing you. First, we will have Ms. Cecilia Guitaiga, UNCBD Women's Caucus Advisor, and Ms. Silvia Hordos, Young Women Policy Advisor, who will deliver their opening remarks for this session. Next, we will hear from Mr. Olivier Rukundo, Senior Program Management Officer and Head of Unit at the CBD Secretariat. Following that, we will have Mr. Benge Niriongo from UN Women's Focal Point for the Rio Conventions. Then we will be joined by Ms. Sandra Solis Geronimo, specialist in biodiversity strategies from the Mexico National Government. After her, we will have Ms. Flora Mongola, the Deputy Director General for Biodiversity and Conservation in the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment from the South African National Government. And lastly, we will close with by listening to Ms. Cecile Njembet, President of the African Women's Network for Community Management of Forests. Thank you so much, everyone. If you could leave your cameras open during the whole session so we engage like a actual roundtable, and so we can also hear from you during the session. And well, now to kick off our webinar, we have the privilege of hearing from Ms. Cecilia Gitaiga, who will deliver her opening remarks. Please join me in welcoming her to the virtual stage. Thanks, Cecilia.
Thank you very much, Amelia, and thank you for the beautiful introduction of all the panelists. And I'm happy to be here today. My name is Cecilia Gitaiga, as you have been told. So my role is to invite you today to join us. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you may be joining us from, different parts of this Mother Earth. And wherever the Mother Earth is taking care of you, please feel privileged. A lot is being done to make sure that we have a safe and a healthy environment, and Mother Earth is doing a great job. So the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework acknowledged that biodiversity is very important for the vision of living in harmony with Mother Earth. And on that basis, the role of women alone in conservation of biological diversity is therefore a timely conversation that we must have as part of half of the global population that interacts very intimately with biodiversity, be it in medicine, for food, water, etc. Thus, women and girls have a strategic opportunity presented by the Gender Plan of Action, through which they must meaningfully, and I repeat, meaningfully contribute to conservation of biological diversity and sustainable use of its components, while deriving benefits arising from utilization of the resources at their disposal. Today, I speak on behalf of Women Caucus, and I have the absolute pleasure to welcome you to the webinar and to invite you to actively engage and ask our great panelists any questions and seek clarifications whenever you feel like we need a little bit more information, because this webinar is for all of us. And just to introduce the Women Caucus, we are an alliance of women from all levels of society and areas of practice. We have networks, agencies, and grassroots women who have coalesced to work together on women and girls empowerment and gender justice in the work of the convention and its implementation. The Caucus has an advisory board from different countries representing different regions based on the membership, and its main function is to provide advisory services on the running of the Caucus with support of our coordinator, Ms. Amelia Arigwin. And here you will find that we have a total membership of over 500 members and 243 organizations from 91 different countries. And so the work of the Caucus is basically to manage this membership, to ensure there's coordination, and to also ensure that we are updated in all our activities with respect to the CBD. And now with respect to related conventions, because they're all related. So the larger body of the Caucus has a lot of expertise, and we are proud and happy to say that to date, we are still growing, and we are happy now to invite our distinguished panelists and participants to our meeting today. And the agenda, as you have heard, is very key to all our activities as we engage in the processes of shaping implementation of the Gender Plan of Action on the ground, how it is implemented, perceived, and the pace at which it will be taken up. The better, and the earlier we do that, the better off we will be in terms of getting a wholesome, more effective solution to the challenges that women and girls have been facing in conservation of biological diversity. We thank you all very much for honoring our invite and for joining us today. And we look forward to a very fruitful and very interactive forum and engagement. And we also hope to hear your great insights as to how we should work together towards implementation of the Gender Action Plan on the ground. Thank you very much. Back to you, Amelia.
Thank you so much, Cecilia, for your words. Now I want to invite Ms. Silvia Hordost, UN Women Policy Advisor, to share her valuable insights and perspectives through her opening remarks. Welcome, Silvia.
Thank you so much, Amelia. My name is Sylvia Hordosh. I work in the policy program in Intergovernmental Division of UN Women in New York. It's been a great pleasure to collaborate and be in regular interaction with the Women's Caucus. I want to congratulate all for the existence of the Gender Plan of Action. It is the result of advocacy, consultation, strategizing over a number of years by women, by the caucus, by parties, by other stakeholders. It was delayed by COVID. It was adopted with some final drama at COP15, but it exists and it builds on previous plans and the convention's recognition of women's role in conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. So congratulations again to the plan. But now comes the exciting part to look forward about what to do with it. The plan is an important tool to support the gender responsive implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and to advance progress towards meeting both gender equality and biodiversity objectives. It's not a goal in itself, but it's a tool for multi-stakeholder engagement. All governments at national, subnational, local levels, the research community, civil society, women's organization, the UN system, and others have responsibilities to contribute to the objectives of the convention, to mainstream gender into all policies, programs, mechanisms, budgets related to biodiversity, and to create an enabling environment for this work. The purpose of gender responsive implementation is to identify gaps and barriers that women face, to analyze those, and to build policies and measures based on that analysis in order to remove existing gaps. The full and effective participation of and leadership of women in contributing to the convention, in contributing to the implementation of the global framework is crucial in ensuring women's rights to access, ownership, control of land and natural resources. This requires measures that ensure that women's organizations and environmental human rights defenders can work free of discrimination and violence. Going forward, it will be important to ensure alignment between the plan and the long-term strategic frameworks for capacity building and other implementation mechanisms. The development, planning, implementation, funding, monitoring of national biodiversity strategies and action plans, the NBSAPs, should systematically integrate gender perspective. And the plan, the GPA, will support this through regular capacity building, including through the role of national gender focal points, who should be well integrated into the relevant institutional mechanisms at senior levels, as we have also seen from other processes. I hope that the Gender Plan of Action can also build on synergies with the other Rio conventions and its gender plans and mechanisms and other frameworks, such as the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Again, thank you all for your contributions to this process, and good luck, lots of energy, good strategies in moving forward. I look very much forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sylvia, for being here today and for the continued support all around this time. It has been really valuable and key to have the GPA now with us. And now it's time to shift our focus to the insights and experiences of our distinguished panelists. But before we proceed, here is a quick overview of our session structure. Each speaker will have 8 minutes for the intervention, and I will let each of you know when there is just 1 minute left. I will needing to interrupt you in case you're taking over time, so we can continue with the session. And following the presentations, we'll move to the Q&A sessions where audience questions are encouraged via chat. So please, while our presenters are providing their interventions. If you have any question or comment, type them in the chat. So at the end of the session, we can come and we will do our best to address as many questions as possible. And then I'd like to invite our first speaker, Mr. Olivier Rukundo from the CBD Secretariat, to provide an overview on the Gender Plan of Action, expounding on its key components and implications. He will guide us through the GPA structure, expected results, and suggested activities. Welcome, Mr. Rukundo. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Amelia, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of the participants to this webinar. It's a pleasure for us to be here. My name is Olivier Rukundo. I joined the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity a few weeks ago, so I'm new. It's kind of a rejoin the Secretariat, and I head the Peoples and Biodiversity Unit of the Secretariat, which is a unit that oversees basically all issues related to Article ENG and related provisions, but of course the gender portfolio. So in this capacity, I'm here to present you the Gender Plan of Action, and I'm going to try to share my screen. Hopefully it works. Amelia, can you confirm that you see the screen?
Yes, we are looking at the presentation, but into the, yes, now, full screen.
So thanks you again. So I'm going to go through very quickly. So the Gender Plan of Action, as you know, which was adopted at COP through decision 15/11. Basically, the GPA recognizes the importance of advancing efforts to achieve gender equality and women's and girls' empowerment to ensure the effective implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and also recognizes that the full and effective participation and leadership of women in all aspects of the conventions in relation particularly to policy and action at the national level is vital. Just a bit of a background, because as it was introduced by the panelists before me, the Gender Plan of Action was developed through a process that started with SAPSTA. There was a lot of input from the working group on the Global Biodiversity Framework with the previous targets, with also the previous sessions of the working group, and finally at COP 15 in Montreal, the Gender Plan of Action was adopted with a decision that actually sort of provide its structure, modalities, and means of implementation. Very briefly, in terms of the structure of the plan has purpose, modalities, expected outcomes, objective, indicative actions, possible deliverable, proposed timelines, and responsible actors. Of course, as any other plan, there's built-in flexibility with regards to its implementation, but this overall and overarching structure is how the plan is structured to guide and to inform its implementation. So in terms of the expected outcome, I'm going to go briefly through them since we have just very limited time for each panelist. In terms of outcome one, it proposes the objectives as follows: increase all women and girls' right to ownership and control over land and access to natural resources, to water, to support the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, ensure equal access for women to resources, services, and technology, ensure gender equitable access in relation to access and benefit sharing instruments, which is sort of mainstream through here at the convention, the Nagoya Protocol on Access and Benefit Sharing. And there's of course linkages also with issues related to Article ENG and related provision. Promote women's empowerment and entrepreneurial opportunities in biodiversity-based supply chains and sectors, and identify and eliminate, prevent, and respond to all forms of gender-based discrimination and violence. So this overarching objective is quite comprehensive, and as you can see, it actually streams through other work pathways of the CBD. So that's quite important in terms of considerations for its implementation. In terms of outcome two, in terms of the objective, It proposes to increase opportunity and strengthen participation and leadership of women at all levels of action, engagement, and decision-making, enhance the meaningful and effective participation and leadership of women in convention processes, and integrate human rights and gender equality consideration into national biodiversity strategy and action plans, which are still NVSAPs, as was said before, are the guiding sort of implementation vehicle of the convention. With regards to the third outcome 3, in terms of objectives, is to develop national capacity to produce and use gender and biodiversity data, including relevant data disaggregation, strengthen evidence-based understanding of analysis of gender-related impact of the implementation of the post-2020 biodiversity framework, support access to information and public participation of women's organizations, networks in the implementation of the GBF, and ensure coherent gender-responsive implementation of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. It also calls to ensure reporting on gender-responsive implementation, allocate adequate human and financial resources. So I just wanted to briefly go through this outcome as presented in the GPA. I'll be, of course, more than happy to go into the specifics of deliverable and action, but given the limited time, we can sort of address this in the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rukundo, for setting the tone for today's discussion and providing a comprehensive overview of the Gender Plan of Action. This actually lays a solid foundation for the rest of our conversation. Now, before listening to our second panelist, I just want to remind my dear speakers that please try to be calm and speak slowly, because is the way of the work of our interpreters. So now I invite Mr. Benge Nirongo from UN Women to share his analysis on the GPA and highlight the opportunities for its implementation at the national and local levels. Mr. Nirongo, please take the stage.
Thank you so much, Amelia. I must first thank you for inviting UN Women to this conversation. I am also new, like Olivier. I'm just a few weeks old in this role, but really happy and excited to be joining you and looking forward to being one of your champions for the caucus as we move forward. Again, congratulations on the GPA. And I really have been very inspired to see what's contained in it. And here I am to share a little bit of what I'm thinking based on what we've seen in it. So I will share my screen and I'll take you through what I've prepared for you today. I don't know if you're able to see it.
Yes, we can see now it's full screen.
Right. Thank you. I just want to, this presentation is going to build very much on what Olivier has spoken about, in a way responding to what we've heard and what we've also seen in the documentation around the Global Biodiversity Framework and how it relates to the Gender Plan of Action. But before we go into that, just wanted to quickly remind ourselves about what is the what are some key considerations around the context within which we have the Gender Plan of Action, but also the Global Biodiversity Framework. The first, perhaps one important thing to consider is that time on global warming is ticking. Science is telling us that nearly 50% likelihood for the period between 2020 to 2026 is really moving us towards the 1.5 degree target that has been set on global warming. The second thing is that we continue to experience intensifying natural disasters, which are threatening biological ecosystems. We continue to see another threat to biodiversity through conflicts within and among countries, which are on the rise. There is political polarization growing, which is actually disturbing, if not driving back progressive policies that would actually see us making progress on biological conservation. We also see the role of neoliberal economic systems continue to take precedence, and these are the environment within which business takes place, and a lot of the damage that we actually see to biological ecosystems happening through these established economies. The systems of unsustainable consumption and production are part of this broader picture, and we continue to experience and to see that they're unraveling the situation we actually see that is threatening our world and biological ecosystems. We also generally just basically the fact that we continue to experience gender inequalities that are driven by various factors, including discriminatory norms and practices. We do have international frameworks at our disposal. For example, the CEDAW, including its General Recommendation number 37 on disaster risk reduction, is one such framework that we can actually rely upon. The Beijing Platform for Action itself has a critical area of concern on women and the environment, but also more recently, CSW 66 has made recommendations on realizing biological diversity ecosystems that are gender responsive and work for women and girls. Now, some of the strengths that we draw upon from the Gender Plan of Action include that it is quite well aligned and has direct relevance to enhancing the gender responsiveness of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We see very good integration of and that the Gender Plan of Action is in direct support of the implementation of the 2030 Agenda, sort of echoing what Sylvia had mentioned at the very beginning in her introductory remarks. One other thing that is most celebrated about the UNCBD process is that it is open and there is high engagement of the Women's Caucus in it. We see a strong anchoring of human rights, building on Resolution 76/300. We have also seen through reading through the Gender Plan of Action and seeing it in action, great integration of intersectionality, where it recognizes the multiple and intersecting identities and circumstances that women find themselves across our globe. And there is strong focus on mainstreaming of gender perspectives, but also the calling out of the engagement of men and boys. So these are among the few that we think are key to consider in looking at the strengths of the GPA. But there are also areas where we think we can actually do more. And we just wanted to share some of these points that we need to take away with us for consideration and action moving forward. One is that we need to see more efforts to realize gender equality as an important outcome in its own right. With that comes a need to see how we can actually measure progress on gender equality targets in other frameworks, such as the SDGs, as a result of the work that we're actually doing within the implementation of the GPA. The second is we need to continue placing emphasis on addressing systemic issues embedded in discriminatory social norms and institutions, including what is happening in the economy. We need to do more on awareness raising as an effective means for engagement of stakeholders. Here, focusing on ongoing as well as new campaigns, such as the Stand for Her Land campaign, would be one of those mechanisms that we can actually ride upon. The other point just wanted to share here is we need a whole of society approach to implementation. And here we're really looking at engagement of those that are most likely to pollute, for example, private sector, but also different stakeholder constituencies within our broader societies. The action agenda of the Global Biodiversity Framework has a comprehensive collaboration of diverse stakeholder constituencies if you look at how and who is actually making commitments for 2030. Now, we see a number of opportunities for national but also regional implementation. One is that the action agenda that I just talked about has more than 700 commitments that are made mainly on regional and country levels. Here, we have to look at how we ensure institutions are strengthened and capacitated through national mechanisms, but also looking at how we can emphasize accountability of stakeholders, where we also see a critical role of civil society really being important in monitoring and holding duty bearers to account. We need to see more opportunities in the localization of the GBF in national mitigation as well as adaptation plans. And here, just to share a little bit more in terms of how do we align to national biodiversity laws, policies, and programs? How do we introduce focal points for gender and biological diversity where they are needed, and ensuring that these focal points are at a senior enough level to engage appropriately in negotiations, but also other spaces where they have influence. We also, I think, should look at how comprehensive engagement of relevant government institutions beyond gender and environment ministries can actually happen. And here, let's think about planning ministries, justice and legal ministries, finance, and others. We also, I think, building on something that Sylvia had mentioned a little earlier, we need to look at synergies with the other conventions, such as the opportunity that is offered by the upcoming strategic workshop happening in July in Berlin. These synergies ensure collaboration of focal points across the conventions, but also highlight the need for interministerial collaboration, including with the national gender equality mechanisms. We need to we can actually draw on stronger focus on factors that reinforce women's lack of participation through the implementation of programs and policy change. And here we're looking at how, for example, we can address norms and practices that marginalize women, girls, and gender diverse peoples through socialized gender roles. And one of the ways in which we can actually do this is the active engagement of social institutions such as local governments and religious establishments. We're also trying to help to advance the contextualization of our work in places where there is conflict or places that are actually recovering from conflict as a means to integrate this important work into national frameworks on prevention and rehabilitation. Continuing on these opportunities, we see another area in creating or strengthening multi-stakeholder spaces for action. For example, the Generation Equality Initiative has an action coalition on feminist action for climate justice, which is actually being localized and being implemented at national and regional levels. Just trying to mention two mechanisms that have been born out of that action coalition, being the Feminist Action Nexus on economic and climate justice that many of you are probably aware of. Being a part of that process can also strengthen our implementation activities and action. The other emerging collective commitment is on establishing a grassroots women's land rights fund, which can also be an important mechanism for advancing the implementation of the GBF and the global plan for action. UN Women is also managing and running Women Count, which is our flagship program on gender and data gender data and statistics. Wherever it exists, we encourage your engagement and collaboration so that you can either support or benefit from the data that is actually being produced through this program. And we also encourage identification of opportunities for collaboration or replication of the women count approach where it does not. And finally, I just wanted to share that where possible, UN Women can also engage at the regional and country levels through our global network of offices. Here, we're implementing programs and policy action that is related to national biodiversity frameworks, for example, through our climate resilient agriculture programs. We also have can engage where necessary and funds allowing in supporting national focal points for the implementation of the GPF. We can also help where relevant the harmonization of approaches to all the 3 Rio conventions as we work through our own internal coordination on how the organization approaches the work of all 3 of the conventions. And finally, just wanted to say that we can also help with the mobilization of national mechanisms for gender equality in the advancement of the work of the GPA. So I'm going to stop there and looking forward to the Q&A. Sylvia and myself will be here to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much, and over back to you, Amelia.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Nyong'o. This was really a thought-provoking intervention. Thanks for that. And also, I hope that our colleagues here from national governments make use of these opportunities that you mentioned. But now I just want to remind our dear audience, please don't forget to send your questions through the chat box. And also for my panelists, just please remember that we have 8 minutes per intervention. So now I would like to invite Ms. Sandra Solis Jerónimo from the Mexico national government to share her country's perspective on the GPA and their implementation plans. Before we begin, please note that Ms. Solis Jerónimo will speak in Spanish. So we encourage you all to utilize the interpretation feature at your screen's bottom for a seamless translation for those that do not speak Spanish. So please now let's welcome Ms. Solis, and the microphone is now yours. Thank you.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Buen día. Sandra Solís de la Conavio, México. Voy a permitir compartirles una presentación. ¿Me confirman si se ve, Amelia?
Sí, estamos viendo el PPT, solo listo, pantalla completa.
Perfecto. Muchas gracias por la invitación. Vamos a platicar un poco sobre cuáles han sido esas buenas prácticas y oportunidades que hemos tenido en la implementación del tema de género, la transversalización del tema de género, y cómo podremos incorporar el nuevo plan de acción de género en el marco de la Estrategia Nacional sobre Biodiversidad de México. Bueno, esta Estrategia Nacional sobre Biodiversidad Mexicana, o en Biomex como la conocemos, es nuestro documento nacional rector de planeación estratégica sobre biodiversidad que tenemos. Fue actualizado y publicado en el 2016 y bueno, en su elaboración participaron más de 300 personas de 30 instituciones de diferentes sectores de la sociedad mexicana. Con esta publicación también México se consolidó como el primer país en incorporar la perspectiva de género de manera colectiva y participativa en su plan de acción de la Estrategia Nacional. Esto fue a partir de un proyecto piloto impulsado por el Secretariado del Convenio y con apoyo de la Oficina de Género de la UICN. El resultado de este ejercicio, bueno, destaca que hay una perspectiva de género en todos los capítulos y apartados del documento, así como en sus principios, en 19 de sus 24 líneas de acción y en 53 de sus 160 acciones. Una vez publicada la Estrategia Nacional de Biodiversidad, se emprendieron diferentes esfuerzos nacionales para ver reflejado este tema de la perspectiva de género en el tema de biodiversidad. Algunos ejemplos que puedo destacar en este momento es el taller de experiencias de mujeres de comunidades indígenas que se realizó en 2018 y bueno, fue como parte del proceso de implementación de la Estrategia Nacional de Biodiversidad. En 2019, ya como parte del reporte al convenio en el 6º Informe Nacional de México, se publicaron 2 estudios de caso muy interesantes, uno sobre perspectiva de género y el otro sobre el fortalecimiento de capacidades de las mujeres, sobre todo en temas de adaptación basada en ecosistemas. De manera reciente, en la CONABIO, lo que hicimos fue una alineación del plan de acción de las 160 acciones del ENVIOMEX con respecto a los programas sectoriales del actual gobierno, de la actual administración del gobierno mexicano, y destaca también el programa de igualdad entre mujeres y hombres, en donde se refleja una alineación ahí de acciones, principalmente con los ejes de conocimiento y en la parte de gobernanza de la estrategia nacional. Un ejemplo reciente que queríamos mostrarles, presentarles hoy, fue el encuentro de mujeres que se realizó para la agrobiodiversidad en México en enero de este año. Fue organizado por la CONABIO, sus resultados y reporte aún no se presentan, pero queríamos compartirlo porque nos pareció un ejemplo interesante en el marco del proyecto Agrobiodiversidad Mexicana. Asistieron mujeres productoras, cocineras tradicionales, emprendedoras, investigadoras y funcionarias del gobierno que documentaron de una forma tan natural el aporte que realizan las mujeres a la conservación de la agrobiodiversidad. También el tema del aporte económico, temas de autocuidado que de pronto quedan de lado en los temas de biodiversidad o en los temas ambientales, pero que sin duda son importantes. Tema de igualdad, pero también la división del trabajo. ¿Cómo es que se realizan los trabajos de conservación de la agrobiodiversidad de manera local en México? A nivel de gobiernos subnacionales, a partir de la publicación de la ENVIOMEX, la Estrategia Nacional de México, entidades subnacionales, gobiernos subnacionales, incorporaron la perspectiva de género, así como la visión de los pueblos y comunidades indígenas en sus planes de acción estatal. A partir de 2018 y hasta 2022, estados como Oaxaca, Quintana Roo, Yucatán, Hidalgo, Ciudad de México y Coahuila ya incorporan la perspectiva de género. Hay acciones, desde estados que presentan acciones, desde 4 hasta 16 acciones muy específicas sobre cómo avanzar hacia la igualdad de las mismas oportunidades y condiciones entre hombres y mujeres. De manera reciente también ya se alineó la Estrategia Nacional de México con respecto a las 23 metas del nuevo Marco Mundial de Biodiversidad. De manera general, hicimos una alineación, una primera alineación de las 53 acciones que tienen que ver con perspectiva de género y mujeres en la ENVIOMEX con respecto a este nuevo plan de acción de género. Encontramos sin duda una alineación en al menos alguna de las acciones de este nuevo plan de acción de género en todos o en los 3 resultados previstos que contiene este plan. Lo que podemos destacar pues es en relación al eje de atención a los factores de presión y amenazas, así como en el de integración y gobernanza. Nosotros destacamos algo importante como parte de lo que vimos en el plan de acción de género, y es que sin duda va a ser importante a partir de ahora pues difundir esos indicadores sobre temas de biodiversidad relacionados con mujeres, pero que estén desglosados por sexo. Entonces eso para la toma de decisiones va a ser muy, muy importante cuando existan, siempre y cuando existan. Algunos aspectos que podemos destacar de esta primera alineación que hicimos, bueno, es que en 23 de estas acciones de género del ENVIOMEX encontramos una afinidad con el resultado 3 del plan de acción de género sobre implementación, sobre todo en las acciones del ENVIOMEX donde se hace referencia a los fondos y financiamientos dirigidos a mujeres. También encontramos que 25 acciones de género del Enviomex se asocian al resultado 1 sobre obtener las mismas oportunidades y capacidades. Esto sobre todo en referencia a la adopción de medidas para poder conservar los conocimientos y saberes para la conservación que realizan todas las...
Querida Sandra, perdóname por interrumpirte, es que están teniendo algún problema con la interpretación. Entonces, si quieres, damos un momento para que puedan escucharte. Okay, so yes, Gael, so it is super. It's solved now. Perfect. We can continue. Lista, Sandra. Muchas gracias.
Sí, algunos aspectos, voy a retomar desde aquí, algunos aspectos destacables que encontramos en nuestra estrategia nacional con respecto al nuevo plan de acción de género, es que justo 23 de las acciones de género de nuestra estrategia se asocian al resultado 3 que habla sobre implementación con perspectiva de género. Sobre todo en las acciones donde nuestra estrategia de biodiversidad habla sobre fondos y financiamientos dirigidos a mujeres. También encontramos que 25 acciones de género se asocian al resultado 1 sobre las mismas oportunidades y capacidades que habla el plan. En particular, sobre el tema de mantener los conocimientos y saberes tradicionales que tienen todas las mujeres en México. Yo cerraría con esta parte de qué aspectos fueron favorables para nosotros para incorporar la perspectiva de género durante la actualización de la Estrategia Nacional de Biodiversidad. Creo que el más importante, que analizamos como el más importante, fue la colaboración que tuvo el sector ambiental durante el proceso de actualización con las dependencias que atienden el tema de género en el país, en particular con el Instituto Nacional de las Mujeres. ¿Cuáles son algunas de las recomendaciones que nosotros hacemos para poder incorporar la perspectiva de género en los planes de acción nacional, pero también en los subnacionales? De primera instancia, el sumar especialistas en el tema de género, capacitarse en el tema, porque de pronto es algo desconocido o poco abordado por los especialistas en biodiversidad. Y el más importante, el que nos parece muy relevante, es el incorporar a la planeación de las políticas a las mujeres líderes de comunidades, a la gente local, que son las que viven el entorno, las que saben cómo se conserva, saben cómo se utiliza, pero también viven los embates del cambio climático y los factores que presionan y amenazan no solo a la biodiversidad, sino también a sus vidas, a su entorno. También, bueno, tomar la perspectiva de género, tomar el tema de género y de las mujeres como un eje transversal para la planeación de todas las políticas y programas a nivel tanto nacional como subnacional. Eso es indispensable. Son dos aspectos que consideramos indispensables, sobre todo capacitarnos, sobre todo tomadores de decisiones que puedan tener esa capacitación. Y, bueno, nosotros cerramos con la idea de que la biodiversidad es un tema que no está aislado del tema de género. Su conservación, uso sustentable, conocimiento y restauración son complementarios al tema de las mujeres, la participación de mujeres y niñas para impulsar su preservación y mantenimiento a largo plazo. Eso es todo. Muchas gracias. A nombre del equipo de la doctora Andrea Cruz, de la CONABIO, estamos para servirles.
Gracias, Sandra. Thank you so much, Ms. Olive. And now we're moving back to the English conversation in case you need to go back to switch again in the interpretation channels. Thank you so much, Ms. Olive, for providing Mexico's perspective on the gender plan of action. It is actually inspiring to witness the concrete steps your country is taking forward to promoting gender equality and biodiversity conservation. Now, it's also turned to listen from another governmental experience, now from the African continent. And I'm really happy that Ms. Flora Mongola had the opportunity to join us. Thank you so much. And she will share also her country's perspective on the GPA and their implementation plans. Welcome, Ms. Mokola, and we are eager to hear such a critical example as the South African experience. Thank you so much. And the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Amelia. Good afternoon to you wherever you are. Good morning, good day, good evening to all participants in this webinar. I'm actually very honored to be part of this. And to those of us that are from Africa, I hope that you had a beautiful Africa Day yesterday on the 25th of May. I'm going to take you through what we are doing as the government of South Africa around gender and biodiversity. Moving on to the next slide. South Africa's commitment to the promotion of gender equality is expressed in the South African National Policy Framework for Women Empowerment and Gender Equality of 2000. And this was really about mainstreaming gender approaches and women empowerment across government. Its implementation is driven by the Department of Women, Youth, and People with Disabilities in the presidency, and it is currently under review. The country also has got a national development plan, and its vision also prioritizes the significant role of women, youth, and people with disabilities in our society. And it states that if these groups are strong, society will also be strong, especially women. Society does need very strong women. And the cross-cutting focus area are mainstreaming to all levels of government. So in realizing this, we also have a framework on gender responsive planning, budgeting, monitoring, and evaluation and auditing that was approved by Cabinet in 2019. This essentially was to ensure that government departments in their budgeting programs are able to include a gender focus. And this framework on budgeting is strategic because it then serves as a catalyst to effect a system-wide paradigm shift towards gender mainstreaming across the state machinery and promotes women empowerment and gender equality within the center of public policy making in priorities and also in results-based planning, in budgeting and accountability. Continue with that framework is that this is implemented across society, especially in the public service at all levels of government, within the public entities, the provincial government, and the municipalities. And it seeks to drive this government-wide planning and budgeting processes that will also promote strong institutional accountability to gender equality commitments in a comprehensive and integrated way. South Africa has committed to 50% representation of government, of women at all levels of government and even in the private sector. We are also encouraged that we're seeing this emerging also even in civil society. In the Cabinet of South Africa, which is the president and the executive ministers and deputy ministers, and even parliament, we have close to 50% women representation. In my own Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, both the minister and the deputy minister are women, and 7 out of 10 executive managers, including myself, are women. And broadly, the department has 46% women representation at senior management level, and the target is to reach 50% by March 2026. Within my branch, which is Biodiversity and Conservation, we have 66% women representation at senior management level. And also to indicate that the department has a gender strategy and action plan for engendering policy in the implementation also. Just continue on the white paper that has been adopted by Cabinet in March, which was just immediately after the GBF was adopted in Montreal rather. We have a white paper that was adopted. It has 4 broad goals. One is about enhancing biodiversity conservation. The second one is sustainable use. The other one is enhanced access and benefit sharing. And the last one is around transformed biodiversity conservation. And the white paper closely aligns with the convention itself. And one of the intended outcomes of the goal on equitable access and benefit share is to ensure that women and youth are empowered in order to stimulate their skills and their technology development. The goal on transformed biodiversity conservation and sustainable use, they also aims to give effect to environment and human rights and facilitate redress and promote transformation. Further on this goal on transformation, there's also a goal to empower designated groups such as women so that they become owners and operators of their own businesses within the biodiversity economy chain. We have a very vibrant biodiversity economy in South Africa. We trade in over 200 species globally. Another objective is to promote participation and influence of designated groups such as women. And further, one of the outcomes of this policy is around ensuring that the integrity and importance of gender-sensitive and responsive approaches of female and youth perspective of nature. They also have influence in respect to which they can influence social cohesion within society. Continuing in respect of some of the challenges that we are aware of, and we know that transformation has been very slow, especially for my country, which come from a very divided past. The biggest challenge is around access to land by previously disadvantaged individuals, especially women, and our Department of Land Reform has made strides in ensuring that women are title holders of land that they occupy. The next one is around access to means of production, such as capital assets, know-how. Even access to capital remains a challenge to women also. And also about barriers to accessing and benefiting from protected and conservation areas by adjacent communities. We have about just over 1,000 nature reserves in South Africa, including national parks. We have about 9,000 game ranches in the country, and these 9,000 game ranches are largely privately owned by previously advantaged individuals, mostly white people. And therefore, we like to ensure that those communities that live close to conservation areas and those that can make their land available benefit from this. And then there's also limited biodiversity-based value chains in communal land, as well as land acquired through land reform processes. We are working with a number of community-based organizational traditional authorities around ensuring that we develop biodiversity economy value within their land holdings. So addressing these challenges obviously has a potential to unlock meaningful access and equitable sharing for designated groups, as well as empowerment of individuals as owners and operators of their own businesses, and that women in traditional authorities and local communities that live around our protected conservation areas are seen as part of the success and failures of these areas. And therefore, they need to be integrated into the work that we are doing. We've started a number of consultation processes with these stakeholder groups, especially traditional authorities and traditional health practitioners, especially traditional health practitioners. We're finding that most of them tend to be women also, and we are developing a focus program to work with them around that. Now, moving to concluding my presentation, we do know that there's a strong need to build partnerships, especially as a country, if we are to transform the sector, so that we can bring women to be meaningful role players in the sector. And this will also not only assist in bringing the much needed skills to communities through mentorship program, but also if we were to use community-private partnerships, our biodiversity goals will be realized. Currently, we are now revising our National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, and part of that will be aligning it with the Global Biodiversity Framework. We have a stakeholder consultation workshop in the next 2 weeks, and we are hoping that we will be hearing a lot from the contributions, especially of women who bear the brunt, as we know, in respect of the loss of biodiversity, the impacts of climate change, but also who hold much of the indigenous knowledge system relating to the use of our biodiversity resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Mongola, for being with us here and for this exceptional presentation. Your contribution has undoubtedly enhanced our discussion, and we are really benefiting from your knowledge and experience. Many of the countries around the world have the opportunity to learn from the long way that South Africa has walked. And thank you so much also for sharing your contact details in case someone wants to also learn more from you. And please, our dear audience, I see that you have already shared some questions, but feel free to keep doing it, and we will come to them in a short time. Now, I would like to invite Ms. Cécile Niembet, President of REFACOF, to share her perspectives on how horizontal partnerships with women's organizations in different territories can lead to better outcomes for both people and biodiversity. Ms. Niembet, it's time for you to take the spotlight. Welcome. We cannot hear you, I'm sorry.
You hear me now without the, do you hear me?
Yes.
Maybe okay, maybe it's the, okay, I have removed it. So good morning, thank you. Morning, evening, afternoon, night, anywhere you are, welcome. And thank you so much, Amelia, for the opportunity. Let me share my screen. I hope I can make it. Double, and then, oh, no, I'm not seeing it.
We are looking at, okay, yes, now it's the presentation, but if you can make it full screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I will be sharing some thoughts on why is it important to partner with women's organizations on the territories to implement the gender plan of action as the path to increase better outcomes for people and biodiversity. So let me have just a very short presentation of the African Women Network for Community Management of Forests, REFACOF. The network I'm coordinating were created in 2009 in Yaoundé in Cameroon. We are now in 20 countries in West and Central Africa, including Madagascar. We are an advocacy platform which focuses on African women tenure rights in land and forests, and we are pushing for forest reforms all over. Our mission is to promote women's rights in Africa and advocate to shape policies and practices for gender equity in relation to land and forest tenure. So we have 4 areas of intervention: capacity building, tenure reforms, advocacy and experience sharing, and women's economic empowerment, which is the last one. By experience, we realized that we needed to work on that to support women's access to decision making. Okay, why does partnering with women's organizations on the territories to implement gender plan of action matters? For us, it matters because of the role women play in biodiversity development and conservation. They are contributing highly in mitigating and adapting to climate changes through initiatives and practices that we can learn all over the world, worldwide. They are very much involved in sustainable management of forests. They are leading the non-timber forest products exploitation and many and very useful and very sustainable agroforestry activities. They are very much engaged in ecosystem restoration, doing mangroves area as well as in territorial forest areas. They are in watershed, in water sustainable management initiative and processes all over. They are also leading wildlife exploitation in many of our countries. And they are now, we can learn from them in what they are doing on improved energy sources with improved cook stove, improved oven and all over to try to mitigate climate change. So for us, it's very important, and there is no way we can make it with them. And how to promote that partnership? Now that we know that the partnership matters, how can we promote it with women's organization on the territories? We have listed few actions that can be taken, and that are also being implemented in many of our countries where we can learn from. For example, we are talking about mapping. It's important to map women's organizations that are involved or interested in all what we call biodiversity and related activities. Building their capacities, and we have to build, for us, it's important to build on women's organization experiences, because they have already good experiences, they are working on the ground, and they have a lot to share with us, and we can build from there to move forward. Exploring and sharing some of the existing best practices they have. All over across continent, we have women doing great things that we can learn from. We also think that it's very important to build the capacities of women's organization, technical capacities, institutional capacities, organizational capacity, financial and technological, all the capacities that will help them to improve what they are doing so far. We think it's very important to connect women at national, regional, and global level for mutual learning and experience sharing. We think that to promote partnership, it's very important to support women's participation in local, national, regional, and global decision-making mechanisms, conferences, forums, dialogues, where they can share, where they can voice their issues, where they can share their challenges, where they can share their best practices. And also building capacity of women organization is also visualizing good practices and promoting creative initiatives that they are carrying out here and there. We think that is also important to addressing women's security, land, forest, and natural resources issues. I think the gender plan of action is it's one of the objectives. As one of the panelists has presented earlier, we can see that they put a good emphasis on that and a good focus on that. And for us, it's extremely important to do some scoping studies on the state of women's access to land, forest, and natural resources in the global south, for example. Where are we? What is the state of the art? It's important. From there, it will give us a good tool for advocacy. Then we will organize advocacy for decision makers on the policies reform that ensure ownership rights to rural women specifically. When I'm talking about rural women, I mean local and indigenous. That will also help promoting collective land and forest collective rights, because we have been experiencing that having women get individual property rights, it's very difficult. But at least in a collective scheme like community forests, that will be community territories, that will be a little bit more easy, because most of the legal framework are existing in most of our countries, and this is going up from one country to the other. And we think addressing women's security issues, security to land and forest issues, is also securing women's territories through mapping and documentation, such as collective land title, community forest, as I earlier said. These are collective title that where women are more likely to be accessing or securing their right than in other schemes. And for us, it's also important to support women's economic and political empowerment to improve their decision-making power. By experiences, we have realized that when women have a good economic status, they are more likely to influence things that are going on in their communities, even in their country. So funding income generating activities that ensure biodiversity restoration and conservation will be something that help women improve their economic state empowerment or status, but also funding the participation of women in all those all the local political elections. For example, we have experiences now where when women are elected as district councillor, for example, some are even mayors, they can influence from inside the rule of the all things that can get that have interest for the women. So helping them to integrate those mechanisms, those decision-making processes is very important at political level as well as in the economic level. And for us, it's also important to engage men. We have to engage male-headed families. We have to engage traditional chiefs. We have to engage young men and boys because they need to build their capacity to improve their capacities on gender biodiversity, on sustainable development. Usually we think that they don't want to promote gender, but most of the time they lack capacities to do that. So it's good for us to engage them and to build their capacities. Piloting some project on the ground and sharing experiences, sharing the lesson learned with those men is key. We have some experiences, we have some initiative working with traditional chief, and we can see the added value and the improvement of the women's rights in those communities. So we think this is something that will help push for better implementation of the CBD gender plan of action, and mapping and sharing some existing best practices will help, of course, to promote the necessity, the importance of engaging men in all these processes. We can't do much without our men colleague, without our brothers, without our husband. It's important to be with them, to work with them, and to engage them so that we have a better result and impact on gender equality in biodiversity. So to conclude, because 8 minutes is maybe is going already, there is a growing evidence on women's contribution to sustainable development in general, with their creative and sustainable practices in managing the nature, the forest, the biodiversity, and in addressing climate change. I think we cannot lack evidence of what women are doing in this. And if we really want to achieve the objective of gender action plan in biodiversity, we need to engage them. We need to work with them. And there are quite a number of initiatives going on here and there promoting and supporting this. What is needed today is not the evidence actually, but is providing substantial financial support to women's and women's organizations to scale up what they are doing, to share across continent, to share across region, to share across country, to share in the countries themselves what they are doing in promoting gender in biodiversity, in promoting, in supporting, in developing biodiversity conservation all over our continent and our countries. So the CBD gender action plan of action for us will only be successfully implemented in rural if rural women and women's organization funding needs are adequately addressed. Providing direct funding is key. Because today, this is what is lacking. The statistics are very, very clear on this. Women have less access to funding financing for climate funding and all type of funding mechanism. And this is what we need to stress on. This is what we have to advocate for. When women have direct access to funding, if rural women and local communities have direct access to funding, it is more likely that we'll achieve what the CBD plan of action, agenda plan of action objectives. If we don't do that, I'm afraid we'll stay as we are or even regress. Thank you very much for listening. I'm very open for questions and comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cecile. It actually, like, we wanted to close the panel with your experience and with your message, because we were sure that you were going to, you know, put the dots on the i's, as we say in Mexico. Like, it has to be like in horizontal partnerships with women on the ground if we want biodiversity to be protected and conserved. Thank you so much for your intervention, and thank you also to all our panelists for sharing their valuable insights and experiences. As we are reading in the chats, and I also shared that feeling that this has been really an impressive conversation, learning from different perspectives and seeing, looking how the multi-sectorial partnerships are the strategy that we need to follow if we want the GBF and the GPA to be a reality. And now, moving into the Q&A session, I will read the question collected from the chat and directing them to the appropriate speakers. Some of the questions have already been answered in the chat, so I'm just gonna acknowledge them and keep going with the ones that haven't. If some of these questions do not have a designated respondent, I will encourage our panelists to jump in and provide their insights. The first question that we have was from Marta Ngalowera, from asking about how countries can have access to available opportunities from UN Women. But I think to Benge, he already answered about making the connections about between the organizations and the UN Women offices. And we also have a comment from Zuhura thanking the panelists from insightful presentations, and also looking to connect women's organizations with UN Women regional offices. And then we have a question from Ino Emery asking about how to integrate women in the promotion of biodiversity policies. But I think that Cecile, and also with the national experiences, that question has been deeply answered. They share really on-point strategies that can be taken forward to effectively engage women in the biodiversity policies and actions. Then we have a question from Catherine Despot about how Mexico is going to include Target 23 into their NBSAP, but also Sandra has already replied to that question, mentioning that the Mexican NBSAP has already been updated, but what they are doing now is just slightly aligning that NBSAP to the new GBF, because since this NBSAP has been developed, it was already done with a gender lens. And then we have a couple of questions from Hilda Margarita to Sandra also about how to engage gender perspective at the subnational level into the environmental policies. And this also has been answered about some concrete mechanisms that Mexico has for subnational participation. And then we have two questions that have remained, that have not been answered. And one, and I will invite any of our speakers to jump in and reply to it. It's about women participation has been encouraged in law enforcement matters by strategies such as the participatory environmental monitoring committees. Nonetheless, the unequal distribution of labor limits their capacity to join these kind of activities. In this regard, what best practices can you share to effectively disseminate gender inclusive strategies? So whoever wants to reply to that, you're more than welcome.
I could come in and
Yes,
give
please.
South Africa's. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Women participation in law enforcement, I can give an example. Our biggest park, Kruger National Park, which is the size of the Netherlands, the head ranger of Kruger National Park is a woman. I can also indicate that even in other national parks and other parks across the country, we do have women rangers that are participating, that are also responsible for law enforcement. And the Chief Executive Officer of South African National Parks is actually also a woman. And therefore, in South Africa, we have the experience of bringing women into these traditional roles that where men were holding the positions and really advancing women in these positions also. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mogola. I think that, yes, like the South African experience is a really good one to learn from. So I encourage all of our audience to get engaged and also to get to know more about what has been done in that country. And to close this session of the Q&A, because we are going to run out of time and we are still going to hear from all of our panelists one final message. And while they are preparing about it, I'm going to read the last comment from Marta, and she is mentioning that it is true that participation of women in the CBD policy issues are very low. However, many women and girls are not aware on gender biodiversity target, despite of being involved themselves in the conservation activities. It is an ample time now, every country to develop programs which can provide opportunities for women and girls to be aware on the target and being part of the implementation of the post-2020 GBF. So with these thoughts on mind, I will invite our panelists to provide their 1 minute final message, but without mentioning first that, yes, the recording and the presentations will be sent afterwards along with a post-event survey. So we keep improving our sessions. So for all of our audience that have been asking that. And okay, so now we will hear from each of our panelists in the same previous speaking order. So we will start with you, Cecilia, if that is okay, and then we will follow with the rest. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I don't think I could have kept up with the notes, but I'm happy the presentations will be there. About the women playing a role in the enforcement mechanism, I think I also want to add to what Flora was talking about, because we have some experience here in Kenya with regard to gender-based violence generally. So our police stations have a person designated to deal with gender issues. And it could be a woman or a man, but I think it's mostly women. So that when you go to a specific station and you have an SGBV section, gender-based violence issue, you report to a specific desk. So that way, all the principles and the issues that are trying to be addressed will already have been taught to that person. So that might be also a strategy. And once again, for me, thank you very much. I really enjoyed the session and I'll be happy to continue interacting in this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now let's hear from Sylvia.
Thank you so much for sharing all these experiences. I think having events like this and networking and making connections across countries between stakeholders is the way to go forward. I'm also glad that we don't understand gender equality as being relevant for women only. So I'm happy that we have Wenge and Olivier with us to take forward also men's contributions to a gender responsive implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework and the GPF. Thank you so much for all your work. Please
Thank you.
Continue.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. And while we listen through to the final messages, I encourage all of our audience, if possible, to turn on your cameras so my colleagues can take some group pictures. And now we are going to hear from Olivier. Welcome to the CBD, and thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, the presenters, the questions, for the good interaction. I think this was thought-provoking in the sense that a lot of issues have been raised, which provides some pathways towards finding best practices that could be implemented in different countries. And I think this is a very interesting and a good way forward. What I wanted to say in terms of opportunities, since it has been raised through various questions, excuse me, as regards to mainstreaming gender into other sectors, into other sort of streams of work that are relevant to the implementation of the convention, I think it's important to highlight that NBSAPs provide a very good entry point to do that. This is the vehicle to guide national implementation of the GBF, and it's important that when updating, revising NBSAPs, as has been mentioned in one example, that this gender aspect be included. But with the GPA, we have now an opportunity to include that dimension with all the aspects mainstream in the gender plan of action, in the GPA, in the sense that it's also cross-cutting. There are issues of rights, human rights, there are issues of access and benefit sharing, there are issues of recognition of IPLCs. Those issues, if well mainstream through the NBSAPs, could provide really good guidance in terms of directing good practices in countries. So this was my final message with regards to that. And again, thank you for the opportunity for the CBD to participate in this very interesting webinar. And we look forward to continue engaging with all of you as we move forward in terms of the implementation of the GPA. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rokundo. And now let us hear from Mr. Mirongo, please.
Thank you, Amelia. I must echo all other speakers that have gone before me to really commend what an important and fruitful and very informative conversation this has been. I have benefited a lot from the different perspectives personally, and I'm sure that resonates with many others. I think a lot has been said. For me, one parting word would be whatever it is that we're going to do to make sure that we realize change on the ground through the implementation of the gender plan of action, that we consider how foundational and unpaid care and domestic work is in influencing women's participation in the work that we're going to be doing. So I think it's really, really critical that all actions consider this factor very seriously and look at how we can address the 3 R's of unpaid care work, particularly, and make sure that that is part and parcel of our action. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Benge. And now let us hear from Ms. Solis.
Sí, muchas gracias. Bueno, yo retomaría una parte del mensaje de Cecil, donde hablaba sobre el acceso a los fondos de financiamiento, que de pronto no son justos y accesibles para todas las mujeres en los diferentes países. Aquí mi consideración sería, no solo es incluirlas en el proceso de implementación o acceso a estos fondos de financiamiento, sino también va a ser muy importante, va a ser relevante que en todos los países sean consideradas las mujeres como parte de esta planeación, desarrollo de programas y políticas que tengan el enfoque y su visión local, ¿no? Para poder que estos sean realmente no solo accesibles, sino que también sean implementables en sus localidades. Por otro lado, bueno, en México seguimos teniendo muchos retos en este tema. A medida que hagamos esta alineación con el nuevo marco mundial hacia la estrategia, hacia el plan de acción de la Estrategia Nacional de Biodiversidad, bueno, también veremos cuáles son los siguientes pasos y los horizontes a seguir en el nuevo marco mundial y en el tema de género. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Ms. Solis. And now let's hear from Mabwola, your final thoughts.
And thank you very much. And thanks to fellow panelists for sharing the insights on their experiences and all the questions that have been posed in the chat group. I just want to indicate that if we are to truly engender biodiversity and the implementation of the GBF, we have to be very, very deliberate and unapologetic in respect of gender, especially in the inclusion of women. This is one of the things that as South Africa, we have learned a lot. I'm a benefit of that deliberate, targeted program of advancing women within the biodiversity sector. So are my other colleagues in the department, as I indicated earlier on. And it is hoped that people like me and other panelists who are here that are very interested in gender will be able to bring all these voices of the hand that rocks the cradle, the hand that nurtures nature into this debate and really enhance the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Mogwola. And now let's close this final session, this final round with Ms. Cecile.
Yeah, thank you. Just to stress that thanks very much for this opportunity and the initiative. Women's organizations are doing great things on the ground. Build on them, work with them, give them the adequate funding, and they'll make things happen. And please, let's engage men, because women alone will never make it happen. Thank you so much. And we are ready to share all what we're doing here and there. So feel free. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much also for the interpreters and to the team behind this event for making this possible. Thank you to everyone for showing interest for this session. We hope this has been really useful. And please stay tuned for the next session and stay safe and see you until the next webinar. Thank you, everyone, and see you around.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Merci, au revoir, bye bye.
Good evening.
Merci,
Bye.
au revoir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Merci.